It's localized entirely within my kitchen. It all comes together.
Pokémon X and Y gave us Amaura, Aurorus, Tyrunt, and Tyrantrum. And you know what I said when they got revealed?
How did it take them this long to do a T-Rex?
Like seriously, Tyrannosaurus Rex is the big cool, the Mega Red Hyper Chad, the holographic Charizard card of real life, the most popular dinosaur, and the one that most people think of when you ask them to think of a dinosaur spontaneously. The only other big popular icon of dinosaurs I can think of would be like a Stegosaurus, or one of the long-necked ones. In this video, we are going to go over these 4 Pokémon, explain what they are, why they are fossil Pokémon, why they are in Kalos, and also many cool facts about their design and the real animals they pull their inspiration from. I'm Lockstin, and this is Gnoggin. Aurorus and Amaura are long-necked dinosaurs. They have those long necks to munch on tree stars. However, there are just so many different kinds of long-necked dinosaurs. Apatosaurus, Brachiosaurus, Camarasaurus, Diplodocus, Haplacanthosaurus, Saltosaurus. Argentinosaurus was the largest thing to ever walk on land at 97 tons and 35 meters, making it longer than a blue whale. Though not as heavy, but considering it doesn't have water to help with its weight, it's honestly more ridiculous. Oh, and how could I even forget the Alamosaurus? Out of all of them though, Amaura and Aurorus are heavily based on the dinosaur genus Amargasaurus, which was a sauropod dinosaur that lived during the early Cretaceous epoch, which was about 129 to 122 million years ago, which is perfect because Amaura's dex states several times that it had been frozen in ice over 100 million years. And this Amargasaurus was discovered in what is now La Amarga, Argentina, and also hence the name of that Argentinosaurus I mentioned. We, as in humanity, not us here at Gnoggin personally, currently have only one complete skeleton of the only species in the genus, Amargasaurus Kazooie? And on it, you can see 2 rows of these absolutely gorgeous and intimidating spines. And in fact, they are the longest spines on any sauropod discovered so far, by a long shot. And up until very recently, it was believed that those spines were used to support 2 sets of sails, reminiscent of the one on Spinosaurus, though that is currently believed to be unlikely, and that they were most likely just very long spines covered in a keratinous sheath. Though most paleo artists still give both rows a small sail that only goes up halfway the spines, or only on the spines on the back, because why not? It might still have had smallish sails, so just draw them on because it looks cool, until it's completely proven otherwise. Might be a while though, because this dino is so recently discovered, having only been discovered in the mid-1980s, and there is such a small amount of evidence for what they looked like. What with having only one mostly complete skeleton recovered, there hasn't been much studying done on Amargasaurus, and what it did and did not have. So like, can you really blame the artists? A sauropod with 2 partial sails, or one with 2 rows of tall, scary spikes on its back, are both pretty cool in my opinion. And this is why Aurorus and Amaura have sails on their head, and Aurorus is going pretty far down its neck too. Maybe it's a nod to the fact that modern paleo art still shows these partial sails. Breaking news! Literally one day after writing this part of the script, a new study comes out that states literally the exact opposite of everything I just said. The study says both anatomical and histological evidence does not support the presence of a keratinized sheath, and that the spatial distribution and relative orientation of the Sharpay's fibers suggest the presence of an important system of interspinous ligaments that possibly connect successive hemispinous processes in Amargasaurus. These ligaments were distributed along the entirety of the hemispinous processes. The differential distribution of secondary osteons indicates that the cervical hemispinous processes of Amargasaurus were subjected to mechanical forces that generated higher compression strain on the anterior side of the elements. Current data support the hypothesis for the presence of a cervical sail in Amargasaurus and other Dicraeosaurids. So basically, the way that the spines are connected to each other and the way that they are connected to the rest of the body indicates that there is evidence of a strain and kinds of tissue connections that would only be there if the spines were connected to each other in more spots than just at the base. Whether that is a set of two sails or some sort of fleshy hump or two remains to be seen. I think that's what this is trying to say. But since we're on the topic of its neck spines, let's talk about why the Aurorus line is a Fossilmon specifically, and not just a dinosaur-inspired Pokémon like many others. As we've covered in all of the other Fossilmon videos, the main criteria for a Fossilmon, beyond the most obvious of it having to be something that is extinct, is that it should be based on something, or in some cases a few somethings, that is important to our very foundational understanding of evolution and or how the Earth was back when it was alive. Like how Kabuto is based on a trilobite, and trilobites are among the most abundant fossils ever, and can be used to identify what period or epoch adjacent fossils are from. With Aurorus here, it is a bit simpler. Amargasaurus are an easily identifiable and memorable sauropod, which is one of the few kinds of dinos you usually think of when you first hear the word dinosaur. But also, it is one of the most easily identifiable Dicraeosaurid, which is a family of sauropod dinosaurs. There are several of dinos in the family which also have spines, including Bahadasaurus, which has these awesome spines that point forwards instead of backwards. And of course, how could I not mention the eponymous Dicraeosaurus? But our boy Amargasaurus is the most well-known, and with the longest spines we've ever found on a sauropod, which just gives it a million extra cool points. And sauropods, in general, are powerful in terms of the awe and the interest that they give to kids and adults who like dinosaurs. They just have the biggest necks, the biggest bodies. To think that something so huge could possibly even exist on land is a wonder of nature in and of itself. It's inspiring, honestly. And even just parts of sauropod fossils, like just the tail, even as casts, make people incredibly interested in learning more about them. Anyway, the Pokémon. Amaura is described as having lived in a cold land where there were no violent predators like Tyrantrum, which is interesting because most sauropods lived in the same places and times as big Tyrannosaurus and other carnivorous theropods, but they didn't have to worry much about them because they were just so big and stompy that most predators just didn't even bother with them, and the few that did decide to bother them would likely stick with hunting the young ones and the sick ones, like most modern big predators. But like, seriously? Sauropods could pack a punch, and they most likely were not afraid to do so. Yeah, that's right, you heard me. They weren't just giant mindless tree trimmers. They had backbone, okay? Take that, Jurassic Park.
Go away! It's okay. Just think of it as kind of a big cow.
Though come to think of it, cows are sort of the same way when threatened, so they logically should have had some fear in that moment at least. Hashtag Lex was right. But then, Game Freak redeems themselves a little bit when it evolves into Aurorus, which, when gripped by rage, will emanate freezing air covering everything around it in ice. Which sounds much more like a giant herbivore when faced with a predator or rival, but it also sounds like having an Aurorus as a partner Pokemon would be kind of an insane working hazard. Anyway though, that's really about it on the Amargasaurus-inspired front. But if we back up a step and look at the Diplodocodea superfamily, we see that because they were on the smaller end of sauropods, a lot of diplodocoids were able to rear on their hind legs to reach even higher up in the trees. Yeah, I said smaller sauropods, because despite what Jurassic Park has taught us, larger sauropods, such as Brachiosaurus, could not rear on their hind legs without breaking them. Also, based on reconstructions of the one skeleton we have access to, Amargasaurus itself most likely could not rear up on its back legs either, partially due to the way the spine's made, which I'll give Game Freak a pass on this one, since relatives could, so you're all good. Plus, the rule of cool. A sauropod rearing on its hind legs looks pretty cool, so just make your cartoon thing however you want. Cooler the better. Also, Aurorus is significantly smaller than real Amargasaurus is. Like, they don't even compare, really. Also, another thing that most Diplodocoids possessed was a very strong whip-like tail, which, if we look at Aurorus, it too has a very long, skinny tail that it keeps curled up, and it ends in a little blip, like a whip. And as for etymology, both of their names are double perfect, both because of the "a" in sauropod, and dinosaur, and also the "a" in Aurora. Related fun fact! The German name for Aurorus, Amargarga, is a fun name to say, and is a reference to the Cave of Gargus, which is a set of caves in France that are famous in paleoarchaeology for their cave art and artifacts of ancient humans, which date back all the way to the Upper Paleolithic, which was also the last ice age, and also had remains of extinct animals in them, which could be a reference to the fact that Amaura was found frozen solid within a glacier, despite that not really being a thing for dinosaurs, since the Ice Age had not happened yet when non-avian dinosaurs were still roaming the Earth, and usually that's a thing that happens with mammals, including mammoths and this steppe bison, which some Russian and South Korean scientists are suggesting trying to extract DNA from and possibly revive. So maybe we'll see real-life Fossilmon in our lifetimes, eh? But speaking of the cold and dinosaurs, contrary to what people used to think, there were dinosaurs that lived in regions that were either very cold year-round or were very cold for part of the year, and thus probably experienced snow for at least a part of the year, and therefore had evolved ways to deal with said cold. Like Pachyrhinosaurus and Eutyrannus had feathers on their whole bodies, basically, and are, so far, the biggest very feathered dinosaurs we've found by a long shot. And this ability to survive in the cold and the existence on feathers on a lot of them are just more evidence that dinosaurs were both warm-blooded and more active than pop culture tends to give them credit for. Another fun fact about the dinosaurs in colder regions. Many dinosaurs in colder climates, like Hypsilophodon, had larger eyes than the ones in warmer climates, which indicates that they had most likely evolved more accurate eyesight to be able to see better during the darker months, which could very well be why Amaura has such freakishly huge eyeballs. Like, come on. It's like staring into your very soul, and it's going to use everything it sees to shame you. Now, non-dinosaur design. Aurorus and Amaura are also based on the atmospheric phenomena known as an aurora, or the polar lights. Auroras, or if you're fancy, aurorae, are nature's light shows. I mean, look at that. They come in several colors depending on what altitude the observer and/or the aurora itself are, including ultraviolet and infrared, which we humans cannot naturally see, and we're only able to observe them with equipment. And just imagine early humans seeing this. It's pure magic, heavenly, souls and spirits themselves up in the sky. But now we know they are caused by disturbances in the magnetosphere caused by the solar wind. These disturbances alter the trajectories of charged particles in the magnetospheric plasma. These particles, mainly electrons and protons, precipitate into the upper atmosphere, and the resulting ionization and excitation of atmospheric constituents emit light of varying color and complexity. Basically, the sun's like all over the Earth, and Earth's like, ew. and it puts on a light show. Auroras can happen whenever, but are most visible at night because of the contrast, and that fact is likely why you can only evolve Amaura into Aurorus at night. And I like how Aurorus's two sails undulate in a manner that is a lot like one of the patterns that Aurorae can move in, and the undulations can be either very slow, so slow that you don't notice it, or they can be fairly fast, which is perfect given that both Amaura and Aurorus can change the speed of their sail's undulation, and also colors. At least in the newer games. And since we're learning about auroras happen mostly near both magnetic poles, and if it's around the North Pole, it's called an Aurora Borealis.
That's it?
Yes.
Whereas if it happens in the south, it's called an Aurora Australis. And what's really cool is that if there happens to be an Aurora Borealis going on, that means there's also an Aurora Australis happening at the same time, which is pretty cool. Just like the Arctic and Antarctic they happen in. Another fun fact, auroras sometimes make noise. It is a hauntingly beautiful noise too, with a distinctive popping, crackling, followed by a spooky whistling. And if you listen to Amaura's and Aurorus's cries, they capture the awe and beauty of that whistling part that auroras sometimes sound like. Break time! I feel like our two Pokemon of the day fit today's sponsor really well.
Hello, me and my giant best friend, regular-sized Piplup, are here to tell you about today's sponsor, Tokyo Treat and Sakura-ko.
Today we meet with the elegant and chill Aurorus, who subscribes to Sakura-ko's monthly box, which includes up to 20 traditional and authentic artisan Japanese snack items, some of which originate from her time, over a century ago.
It's made of shrimp, that's what you eat. You eat shrimp.
How? And Tyrantrum is hype for Tokyo Treat, a monthly box with up to 20 of the latest, greatest, limited edition and seasonally flavored snacks only available in Japan for a limited time.
Cookies and cream waffle, this is barely legal. This combination, how? Oh! It is better than I could have imagined. Because the texture. I didn't even think about texture.
Did somebody say pudding Kit Kats? Yes, please. I freaked out about it and hurt myself. And did I mention that you can get $5 off with the coupon code Lockstin? Because you can.
Look! Look, cool, look cool. Yes. Ooh. Fruit.
And if you order by the end of the month, you'll get the same box we showed here. So go get yourself an educational and delicious box of goodies with the links in the description, and big thanks again.
Caramel popcorn soda. You don't get any of this, you're gonna get sticky. Yeah. That's what it is.
Now then, Tyrantrum and Tyrunt are most clearly based on, you guessed it, Tyrannosaurus Rex. The most famous dinosaur in the world, and thus is probably the only dinosaur everyone knows the exact species name of. Like, can you even think of the name of any particular Triceratops species? How about any specific Apatosaurus species? I don't even know what an Apatosaurus is. And I just mentioned it like
14 minutes and 41 seconds
ago. The Tyrannosaurus part of its name is its genus name, whereas the Rex is its species name. And put together, they form its binomial name. And given that T-Rex is the most easily recognized and famous dinosaur of all human paleontological knowledge, and is also one of the ones with the most fossils found and the most studies done on it, I don't think I really need to wax poetic about why it's a fossil Pokemon instead of just a Pokemon inspired by an extinct thing, now do I? And since long-necked dinosaurs are sort of the second place, that's why Aurorus is a fossil mon too. And let me tell you all about the amazingly terrifying mega beast that is T-Rex. There's a reason why it is the most famous dinosaur the world over. There's a reason why I was able to find something as cool as this at just some generic craft store. Right? How many dinosaur things do you think they have? One. It's T-Rex. Do you think it's just that big and popular because it has the most epic scientific name, which translates to Tyrant Lizard King? Or is it because it is one of the dinosaurs with the most remains we've found, due to it being such a successful predator that it got very widespread and populated? Or Is it because it was a beast of a hunter? Well, one super cool thing is that depending on which study or reconstruction you go off of, it is either the largest land predator ever, or is a very close second, only behind Giganotosaurus or Giganotosaurus. And also it could be tied with Spinosaurus, with a few other less well-known big theropods thrown in just to be safe. But man, the debates on who was the biggest is fierce among paleontologists and paleo nerds. What a bunch of nerds. Nerd! But either way, T-Rex was huge. One of the largest specimens we've found, named Sue, has a length of 12.4 meters, stands 3.96 meters tall at the hips, and has been estimated at between 8.4 to 14 metric tons as of 2018. Sue's head, which is displayed separately from the rest of its body, which has a cast of the head on it instead, is almost 5 feet long and 272 kilograms, all on its own. Speaking of T-Rex's skull, the fact that it's so wide at the rear compared to the front of the skull, combined with the shape of the eye cavities, meant that it had extremely good binocular vision, because it's an extremely good predator. And our big friend's nose was also highly developed and could most likely smell a carcass from miles away, and was comparable to a modern vulture's sense of smell. Research on the olfactory bulbs has shown that T-Rex had the most highly developed sense of smell of 21 sampled non-avian dinosaur species. This, by the way, is a huge sample size for fossils, since getting access to multiple specimens from multiple museums and universities is difficult, even in our modern interconnected world. And other recent studies have also shown that T-Rex had an acute sense of hearing, especially lower-pitched sounds, and most likely used this as a means to keep track of other T-Rexes, along with tracking prey. It also seems to have had a very good sense of touch for a dinosaur, and it might have used this gentle sense of touch as a way to safely move eggs around its nest with its head, and to sense how hot or cold the nest was. Just like crocodiles, they sure do look ferocious, but they are very gentle, loving mothers. It also had the greatest bite force of any terrestrial animal of all time. An adult Tyrannosaurus could have exerted 35,000 to 57,000 newtons, or about 8 to 13,000 pounds of force in its back teeth. A modern great white shark has about 10,000 newtons, or 2,300 pounds of force. So just use your memories of Shark Week to think about how terrifying that makes Tyrannosaurus in comparison. It most likely used this absolutely insane bite force to rip into bone and sinew, so it could consume most or all of the body of its prey. Basically, if something could fit in its mouth, it could chomp through it. And most things could fit in its mouth because it could open its mouth almost 80 degrees. And given that the length of a large T-Rex skull is about 5 feet long, that means that a T-Rex could definitely swallow a human whole, probably without even giving it a second thought. And this incredible size and strength definitely makes Tyrantrum's dex entry stating that it could shred thick metal plates as if they were paper, and that it was invincible in the ancient world it once inhabited. That's definitely not far from reality. Even the baby of the two, Tyrunt, has a dex entry that states its immense jaws have enough destructive force that it can chew up an automobile. It's very telling of the ferocity of both the Pokémon line and the dinosaur they are based on. Oh, and a fun little side note, paleontologists have found a skeleton of an Edmontosaurus, a kind of duck-billed hadrosaur that was a common item on T-Rex's menu, that had a T-Rex tooth embedded in its tail, and it was able to go on and live a full, hopefully happy life, with the bone healing around the tooth after a minor infection.
Life, finds a way.
And that media trope about dinosaurs having dinky tiny little brains compared to their bodies is true for some species, but not here. T-Rex did all of this with a relatively huge brain, which was pretty complex and intelligent for a dinosaur. Its brain was one of the largest ratio-wise of any dinosaur tested, only barely being beaten by certain small Maniraptiforms. Bambiraptor. Ornithomimus, and Troodon. If I say it slow, I have a higher chance of pronouncing it correctly. But all of them have intelligence comparable to modern crocodiles and even some modern birds. There was one study that said that T-Rex might have been as intelligent as a modern chimpanzee even, but given that reptile brains and mammal brains work very differently, that particular study is seen as extremely doubtful by most paleontologists. Either way, our big friendo was bonkers smart for what it is, and used this to rear their young well, hunt well, scavenge well, and was a very fitting end to the line of Tyrannosaurids. T-Rex lived during the late Cretaceous period and was one of the very last non-avian dinosaurs. The thing that finally took out T-Rex was the KT extinction event, aka the big meteor that took out all of the non-bird dinosaurs. Also, if you don't know, it's been somewhat recently confirmed to have been at the Chicxulub crater. That's where the big meteor, like, pew! Right into the world. An anti-dinosaur vaccine. Now let's get to specimen FMNH PR 2081, more commonly known as Sue. Probably the most well-known individual dinosaur in the world. I mean, first of all, most dinosaur fossils we find are partial, like very partial. Maybe a leg and a rib, but Sue has over 90% of the bulk found and is 73% complete in terms of the amount of bones and other fossilized viscera, which is a lot for an actual dinosaur fossil. But also, Sue is basically the mascot of the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, Illinois, which is where their body has resided since 2000. Sue also has an incredibly delightful official Twitter account, full of such amazing tweets as this, and this. I love this. Now, Sue has a very long and complicated history, both when they were living and when they were discovered. Sue was discovered by American explorer and fossil collector Susan Hendrickson. She had been on a fossil search with workers from the Black Hills Institute, a private corporation that specializes in retrieving and then selling fossils. In 1992, BHI opened up the Black Hills Museum of Natural History in Hill City, a non-profit paleontological museum. So, why isn't Sue displayed there? Well, because that very same year, while Sue's bones were still being cleaned up and studied, the spot where the Institute was cleaning up the fossil was raided by the South Dakota National Guard due to disputes over whether the BHI had the legal right to the fossil, because the owner of the land, Maurice Williams, claimed that the money they had paid him, $5,000, had not been for the sale of the fossil, and that he had only allowed Larson to remove and clean the fossil for later sale. Williams was a member of the Sioux tribe, and the tribe claimed the bones belonged to them. However, the property where the fossil had been found was held in trust by the United States Department of the Interior. So basically, it was a big ol' mess of who had the right to do what. Charging Larson on 158 points. The government transferred the remains to the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, where the skeleton was stored until the penal and civil legal disputes were settled. But this whole mess was so convoluted and so weirdly handled that the United States Senate voted not to confirm the appointment of Kevin Schiffer as United States Attorney for the District of South Dakota due to the controversy of how he handled all of this. So just like, history's fun. Eventually, Williams, the man who owned the land, was given the rights to Sue's skeleton, and he eventually decided to sell it, because he wanted loads of money, I guess.
Loads of money.
So he partnered with Sotheby's, a broker of fancy stuff, to auction the fossil. Then, the Field Museum was all like, dude, we don't want the greatest piece of prehistory in history, like the greatest fossil ever found, to be hidden away in a hellishly minimalist mansion of some bourgeoisie troglodyte. But also, we don't have the kind of money to buy that. So they contacted a bunch of corporations and rich individuals like the California State University System, Walt Disney Parks and Resorts, McDonald's, Ronald McDonald's House Charities, and just a bunch of nouveau riche people who all agreed to help them. On October 4th, 1997, the auction began at $500,000. Less than 10 minutes later, the Field Museum had purchased the remains with the highest bid of $7.6 million. And the final price, with all the fees and everything, was $8,362,500. Yeah, that was not a typo. $8.3 million. But actually, Sue isn't even the most expensive dinosaur fossil ever. But the most expensive dinosaur fossil ever is another T-Rex. May I introduce you to Stan? And the Black Hills Institute had their hands on this one too. Stan was auctioned off to an anonymous seller for $31.8 million. That's an even more unfathomably large amount of money. Stan will be the centerpiece to the still being built Natural History Museum in Abu Dhabi, though. So that's neat. Anyways, back to our lovely Sue. The cost of the auction, combined with the cost of moving and preparing Sue, meant that they couldn't even afford to haul Sue upstairs to be displayed with all of the rest of the dinosaurs in the museum. Instead, the fossil was put at the entrance of the museum for 18 years. But as of 2018, Sue is now in their own gallery, which includes animated videos of what they would have looked like in real life, doing such beautiful things as scavenging the dead remains of an Ankylosaurus, hunting an Edmontosaurus, and more. And Sue's head is so heavy and so important for studying that it is kept in a separate glass case that gives scientists easy access to it, and also meant that they saved money on trying to make a scaffolding strong enough to mount a 600-pound skull to. Gotta penny pinch all that you can. Turns out that before dying, Sue survived a lot of wild stuff. They lived till about 28 years old and survived parasites and broken bones and even gout. They healed from a lot of injuries that take out even well taken care of domesticated animals with human care. They had arthritis, and we still do not know exactly what Sue died of, though. The museum also commissioned Blue Rhino Studio to make a life-size, scientifically accurate model of Sue, complete with a young Edmontosaurus and their formidable jaws. It's so incredibly lifelike, and not only is it accurate to T-Rexes as a whole, but it is also accurate to Sue themselves. It has the scars and the places that the bones tell us they would be, and also signs of past infections and illnesses that the fossil says Sue experienced. Also, notice the veiny, muscly flesh. The meat on them bones. The lack of weird sunken pits in the cheeks. Mwah, it's a beauty to behold! Dinosaurs, especially carnivorous dinosaurs, do not have the sunken-in cheeks that a lot of media likes to depict them as having. Like, it makes them look scarier, yeah, but it's not right. I do get where the idea comes from, though, because their skulls do have these weird holes on the sides, which a lot of paleo artists throughout the decades have taken to mean that these parts of the face must be sunken in. But no. These weird holes were for connective tissues for their incredibly strong and robust musculature system. Speaking of a robust musculature system, a big part of why T-Rex has the hilariously puny arms that it does is because you can only have so much musculature and ligaments running through the entire body, especially between the head and arms without taxing the body too much. So, evolution basically decided that T-Rex and most of the other later Tyrannosaurids should have those insanely powerful, terrifying jaws, but doing so takes points away from arm strength, essentially. But these tiny little arms are still fairly strong, all things considered. Most estimates place it at about at least as strong enough to rip a human arm clean off. You know? It probably used this strength to help hold carcasses in place while it ripped and shredded through them. And to help right itself after sleeping or having fallen down.
I've fallen! and I can't get up!
But it most definitely could not use these arms during actual hunting.
But wait a second. I thought T-Rex and most other dinosaurs like it all had feathers. So why doesn't this most scientifically accurate model have them?
You may be thinking, well, for T-Rex specifically, we don't know for certain if it may or may not have had feathers. There is some proof that they had proto-feathers as babies, but lost them during adolescence, using them for thermal regulation while they were smaller, basically. But we have yet to find any shreds of proof of proto-feathers on adult T-Rex, and in fact, we have skin impressions that show scales. But of course, that doesn't necessarily prove that they didn't have feathers, because it's possible that those particular spots didn't have feathers, and they had feathers elsewhere. And also, we know from other dinosaurs that some of them just have feathers growing between the scales. So it's kind of up in the air, but the most agreed upon thing is that T-Rex, as an adult, specifically, did not. Or at least not completely. Though there are smaller tyrannosaurs, such as Dilong and our beloved Eutyrannus, with feathers on most of their bodies, which may have been an inspiration for the white feather-like protrusions on both Tyrunt and Tyrantrum, and also the white on Tyrantrum's chin. But since we're finally talking about the Pokémon themselves again, both Tyrunt and Tyrantrum have 2 clawed fingers on their arms and 3 clawed toes on their feet, which is accurate to T-Rex and most other Tyrannosaurids. The orange crown-like crest on Tyrantrum, and to a lesser extent these 2 little horns on Tyrunt, could be inspired by the crests on other carnivorous dinosaurs, such as Allosaurus and Carnotaurus for Tyrunt specifically, and for Tyrantrum, Dilophosaurus and Cryolophosaurus, which is actually the only crested dinosaur with a crest that goes perpendicular to the skull instead of along the length of it. The same way Tyrantrum's works. Tyrunt's smaller bumps, or crests, could be a reference to Gorgosaurus as well, which had similar bumps above its eyes. And this crown-like crest, along with the regal-looking beard of Tyrantrum and the white collar-like feathers on both of their necks, make them look very kingly, which is extremely befitting of a dinosaur based on the Tyrant Lizard King. And also, the Dex is constantly hammering home that Tyrantrum behaved like a king, and the tyrant part is very apparent in both of their Dexes, since it is said that if something happens that it doesn't like, it throws a tantrum and runs wild, which brings to mind the entitled young prince trope, especially paired with Ultramoon's entry, which states, Tyrunt is spoiled and selfish. It may just be trying to frolic, but sometimes the ones it's trying to frolic with are gravely injured. And this royal, tyrant, kingly nature of them could also explain the dragon type. In many stories, dragons are very much tyrannical rulers, hoarding wealth, demanding sacrifices, things of that nature. Plus, like, T-Rex is kind of already almost a dragon. You just, like, slap some wings on a theropod dinosaur. Boom, dragon. And both of these Pokemon having many reflective orange or golden parts is definitely a reference to how rich kings are, and draws on the heavy use of gold as a motif to show royalty. It's not as obvious in their original art, but looking at their Pokemon home art, the orange parts are definitely more reflective. Like gold, and then their shinies have the gold replaced with silver, most likely because it's actually platinum, which is often regarded as just as, if not more, prized. And this brings us to why these 4 fossil Pokemon are in Kalos, which is based on France. Europe has had plenty of tyrant kings throughout its history. Many wars fought over nothing more than a king just wanting something another king has, or just straight up power. As for France specifically, Napoleon Bonaparte is said by many to have been a tyrant emperor, and his name is fitting of a T-Rex too. Gonna rip your bones apart. But of course, we cannot talk about bad kings without mentioning King Louis XVI, the king in power during one of the most famous revolutions in history, the French Revolution. The main French Revolution. As some historians put it, Louis's indecisiveness and conservatism led some elements of the people of France to view him as a symbol of the perceived tyranny of the Ancien Regime, and his popularity deteriorated progressively. And that's putting it lightly. His greed eventually led to a wealth gap almost as bad as the US's today, and so the people brought out the guillotines. But all of this talk of kings and monarchs in relation to Tyrantrum makes me wonder then if the intent with Aurorus's more feminine features is to make it more queenly. These two are partner Pokémon after all. Could this in turn mean that Aurorus is partially inspired by the Snow Queen, a famous Swedish fairy tale that would go on to inspire the massive Disney movie Frozen? Perhaps. After all, Kalos has quite a number of more Northern European-inspired Pokémon, such as, heck, the legendary trio, all pulling from Norse mythology, and also Aurorus already, with its Aurora Borealis frills. Honestly, that's a big enough connection to Northern Europe that, like, saying it's the Snow Queen... like, duh. Aurorus is colored an icy blue, like most of the Ice Queen's gowns, which also are similarly adorned with ice crystals. Also, smaller detail, but I really like how Aurorus' neck changes colors with this edge of a snowflake line. It's a really nice touch. But also, perhaps you could see its long sails as a reference to a hennin, these tall hats with long, flowing fabric typically worn by queens, princesses, and noblewomen, primarily those in Burgundy and France. So really, it just all lines up perfectly. And I love when that happens. But what do you think? Do you like the Gen 6 legendary Pokemon? I sure do. And do you think we should sort of continue this fossil series by also looking into the non-fossil Pokemon that are inspired by dinosaurs and such? Let me know below. And until next time, never stop using your noggin.